Hi, I'm Jasper, and welcome to Aliens Love Earth, the platform where we heal the Earth with art. Today I'm having a talk with Laura Gardea, known artistically as Proxevita, a climate-centered artist, storyteller, and permaculture princess. She is also the founder of the Southside food forest. Proxevita is more than just a band, but rather a platform for social change, as they say it. They describe their art and efforts as bridging the natural world and the digital, and they see their music as an offering to Mother Earth. Now, musically, they mix genres like dream pop, electronic shoegaze, grunge, and sound healing to champion sustainability, solar punk vision, and indigenous ethos. I'm really excited for our talk with today's guest, but before we dive in, I'd love to invite you to heal the Earth with us for free. Yeah, really. Just hit that subscribe or follow button wherever you're listening or watching, and we'll help restore 1 square meter of ecosystem where it's needed the most in your name. It's just 1 or 2 clicks, completely free, and you're really healing the earth with just that. Now, thanks a lot, and please welcome to the show Laura Gardea, also known as Proxevita. Right, Laura, it's so nice that you're here, Proxevita, if I pronounce it right. Yeah, I'm really excited for catching up with you and hearing your whole story and how you're connecting art and earth protection as well. But most important question first, how are you doing?
My goodness. Thank you for asking that first because I feel like that if that isn't the heart of the work right there, making
Mm,
sure you're okay, making sure everyone else is okay, and, being able to listen to that. That's why I feel like this is such a cool conversation because music reminds us how to listen and kind of let go a little bit. And
mm,
I think really uh, bridges people together in this space, especially, where sometimes the words aren't enough.
yeah, I feel
Hmm.
that. Yeah. I think especially with a sonic platform or a sonic medium as music is,
Hmm.
indeed, I can imagine. Yeah, I have a lot of questions because obviously before we jumped on, like in the past days, I did like some research. I saw you're doing a lot, like really. So I think we have a lot
Thank
of
you.
things to talk about. But one thing that I always like to ask before like diving into the deep is would you actually describe the things you do creatively and artistically, like yourself?
Oh my gosh. Well, I
Where to start?
yeah, because and the sustainability and I love permaculture and like placemaking and you know creating the kind of scenery around which or really supporting, right? And as far as ecology goes. But um gosh, yeah, what a question. So that's one seat I guess that I sit in and work in. And then I mean music was my first language, so I was singing from the time I could make noises. So probably, the first day I was out, I was singing. So that and then I've also studied opera, so that's another classical space, and that's been really interesting too because I'm also really into re-indigenization and kind of how do we reclaim all the parts of who we are, even through like the collective time spaces that we've inhabited intergenerationally, um, you know, and across landscapes and across, time zones, literally, right? So,
That's so cool. Yeah.
so
Yeah, it sounds
that's
like quite some personal evolution there also through like
absolutely.
because from a little girl like being able to make noises and turning that into music, that's quite some steps there, I feel. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Do you feel there was a lot of like music or artistic expression when you were a small kid then that you took that over kind of? How did that shape or
Yeah, I think, I mean, my parents, I'm kind of black sheep of the family in that more of my family is in the sciences and like engineering,
Hmm.
but they were always really good about playing all different types of music. So, I'd run around playing to like Mana or like world music or Maria Callas or, basically the heavy rotation at my parents' house was kind of insane. It was like all of the genres, which I think really exposed me to a good kind of breadth of sounds to think about. And then I also spent a lot of time outside, like, I would be outside every day, so, the sounds in nature were always getting inoculated, and, I mean, there was one path I would run as a child, and, like, I knew every tree branch and, like, every part of the path. Like, I could run barefoot, like, at top speed and not fall, like, I knew everywhere, it was, like, that kind of connection to the land, and, when you're a little person, you just, like, fly all the time, right? You're just like
Yeah. Yeah. A lot
Yeah,
of play. Yeah. Yeah. That's
absolutely.
super
Mhm.
interesting to hear though, because I kind of hear you say that both the music and the earth and nature aspect were actually both already pretty young there then. Mm.
Absolutely. Yeah, there
Did they just both grow with you then, or?
I think so. Yeah, I remember there's actually, like, a home movie, and I'm, like, holding up worms, and I'm like, "They're so cute," like, I just always had that love of the nature, and if it wasn't worms, something else, right? So mhm.
That's cool. Yeah. So music always around. You're singing. How do you then end up deciding to study opera, actually?
Oh gosh, I was taking, like, a music theory class in high school, and my teacher asked, like, a high school class, you know, who would like to go to the opera, and no one raised their hand, and I was almost embarrassed because this is the US now, it's not Europe, So, it's
Yeah.
North Carolina, USA, and so no one raised their hand, and I was kinda like, "Oh, okay." But then I tried to leave the classroom, and the teacher stopped me, and he said, Laura, I think you'd really enjoy the opera." And I was like, "Well, could I bring my mom? Because my mom loves opera." And he said, "Yes, of course." So there were tickets. It was the last, like, dress rehearsal for Verdi La Traviata. And I just, like, fell in love. I was like, "Oh my gosh, if I could sing like this, before I die." Like, I went to see the next 2, 3 I've got a ticket for every performance after that. I was, like, bawling, just so moved by the power
That's
of
it.
it, like,
Yeah.
the frequencies and the whole storytelling. So, yeah, that was kind of how that occurred. And, yeah, and then, through that, I think I had an arc of evolution too, because for anyone that's ever been in a conservatory setting, it's very stressful sometimes. I mean, life is stressful, period. That's just kinda how it is these days, but, um,
Mm.
yeah, but it's also such a beautiful, discipline, and I think it actually taught me a lot of skills that I was able to then transfer over to my work, like with nonprofits and the activism and really advocacy, instead of activism, I like to say. So,
Yeah. How did that like wave in? Like, what's the timeline there? Like, you studied the opera, and then did you then on the side already work or started working in like advocacy and stuff, or is that really something that came in when you finished your studies and then took music more serious? Or
it came in organically. I mean, I had, taken not quite like a gap year, but like a gap semester, because after my sophomore year, I just felt like really I was starting to feel like it was taking away the joy from me. So I was like, let me take a little break and,
Mhm.
like, work and do some things and reconnect to that space, authentically. And so, that was kind of around the time I started making my own music and getting
Mhm.
more into what was bringing me joy. And, because I was singing every day, like I was singing for voice lessons, opera workshop, um, master classes, ensembles, my lessons, these sorts of things. And outside of that, I wasn't singing. So I was like, oh, I need to really dial
Mhm.
in and lock in here so I can figure out what's going on. Cause if I can't get that, then why am I? You know what I mean? So I just had that moment. I was like, okay, I could just get the degree and never sing again and like lose part of who I am. Or I
Yeah.
could, take a little break and tend to me, figure that out and come back and then do even better.
Mm.
So I think
Also,
that's
like to
the
avoid losing the joy in it, actually, in what you started because you
yeah,
liked it so much.
which comes back to your first question. I'm so sorry I didn't ask you, like, how are you doing? Because
Oh
that
yeah,
is such the
yeah,
center of it all, whether it's music or sustainability or, anything. So I think
yeah.
that
Thanks. Thanks for asking
mhm,
that back. Yeah, I'm doing really well. Yeah, I'm really
yay.
excited. I think especially to see like there are more and more interviews like coming up now for Aliens of Earth, and I think as I briefly said before we hit record, like I'm really excited, and it makes me really hopeful to see more and more. You know, art is something beautiful and nature is something
Mhm,
beautiful, and I think it's both also essential for human beings, and to
mhm.
see two beautiful essential things like go hand in hand, and more people like take that on as kind of a mission and kind of incorporating that into work. I think that's a beautiful thing to see. Yeah, so yeah, that makes me
Thank
really
you.
happy. Yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Is that also how Proxevita, how that project started then, to find your joy back in music a bit, or is there another why
Yeah,
behind that
I have a
project?
couple of projects. I've had a couple bands. So, yeah, the very first band I started was a girl band called Diamond Lotus. So I fronted that band and it was more punk grunge. Like
Cool.
it was cute. And then after that I was in it was like almost 60s girl rocky. It was called the Fauvettes. And I sang with my friend Chelsea in that. And then actually was
Whoa.
the drummer of that band, believe it or not.
Oh, so cool.
But it was like very simple, like bump, 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 that, like that kind of
Yeah. But
instead of
did
like
it
be like
spark joy? That's the big question, right?
it sparks so much joy, so
Yeah.
much.
Mm.
Yes. And so that, and then I did Mama, which was kind of the first iteration of the climate into the music I was making.
Mm.
Um, and so that was a group that I was working with. We were doing like community gardening projects and we were just volunteering together and we were just kind of like, hey, we should start a band, like almost as a joke, but then we did, you know? So
Very
that
good
was,
joke. Yeah.
yeah, again, the play and just like keeping it serious, not serious, right? To actually get to where you want to be. I think that's like another wisdom that the arts gives us. Um, and so yeah. And then that just got me to thinking, how can music be a platform for that work? How can it become more, um, yeah, of an elevation point and amplification of these solutions and like because we started that group because we learned that a lot of people weren't growing their own food because they didn't know where to start or like how to start. So we
Mm.
worked with the North Carolina Agricultural Extension Office, and we had, some limited funding from the neighborhood, but we were able to get, enough, so to speak, with like tool shares and these sorts of things going to help people to start their own like in-ground beds and raised beds even. And so that was just really fun and empowering too, because it also ended up being very intergenerational. And, we're like talking to the neighbors and getting to know them. And, they're having us over, they're feeding us, they're giving us drinks and things. It's just a really great time. It really brings people together. So, but how I got to that from my art and like why that was important, I think I had just like anyone should, when they're just getting to be an adult, had some existential crises and was just kind of like, what's going on here? Like, you know, what is this business as usual? Why is it not making sense to me in all the ways? And so I just kind of peeled back and I found myself in a local park where there was a waterway. And it's a park called Washington Park. And there was a spot where where the art school students would go. We knew these little nooks. Like you had to go And it's like, how does people find these nooks? Because you have to go like a little trail like off. Like if you know, you know. If you don't know, you don't know type.
Mm, like a
But
hidden secret fairy way, kind of.
really, for real, it was like a portal to another reality. Because I mean, you're there in the middle of the park, but you feel like you're in a whole other world. And so it was there, and the water is going, and the light was just like coming through the trees, and I was just like, wow, like this is. I had that like lock in point where I realized like there is really no barrier from this inner landscape to the outer landscape. And like, when we're looking out into the world, like we're looking out to extensions of ourselves and each other, the oneness that people talk about. That's kind of that experience. And I just had this thought like, wow, like we need to be better to ourselves and each other. Like this is so beautiful. And, let's nurture that. It was like, how can, and then food, environment, soil, air, and water, all these connections are just going off in my head. And I'm just like, wow, this is, sustainability and these things are so important. Now it's like, but so after I graduated, so this is like, I actually got my undergrad in 2016, and then I did my sustainability graduated 2018. So just before COVID now, right? But if you can imagine, crazy, right? But that time, people didn't really know what sustainability was. So like it was so annoying because I'd be, in my studies, and then people were like, "Oh, what is that?" Like I had to explain
What are you
what I was
studying actually?
oh my god. So, like I have these two things that people don't understand, like opera and sustainability, like how does it
Yeah.
even connect?
I
Now,
find it a pretty badass combination, I gotta say. But
well,
yeah, but
thank you.
it's cool like to hear that you were already studying that basically when you had this spark moment, right? So you were
Yeah.
already like more drawn to it or like open to maybe open to seeing that or interested in it. Anyways,
Mhm.
yeah. Yeah. But it does make a lot of sense then that those things come together because you study both of them, right? And they like kind of just grew into each other then after that moment or insight, basically. Uh,
Naturally.
yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, was it then Proxevita already, or was that like before?
Oh my gosh, yeah, I'm sorry, I couldn't
Far
that last
before.
question. Okay. So, yeah, 'cause I left off on mama. So mama was like
Oh yeah.
Pachamama, which is like being a voice for and of the earth. So Pachamama, I don't know if you've ever seen this beautiful work by Frida Kahlo. I think it kind of depicts this, but it's
Maybe if I
like,
see it.
yeah, it's like a big Mother Earth, embracing like all of the life on the planet. And then there's like a celestial, you know, version too, which is really beautiful because it like scales out across from the planetary to, the cosmos, which I love. And so,
Okay.
um, Mama's was very like punk grungy, like getting, but still like etheric, kind of ex- like superimposed with that texture. So it's kind of like cutting through the dissonance of the culture and these sorts of things. There's, reason for those choices. But
Mm.
with Proxevita, I was like, how does mama still exist in the 21st century and like beyond? How does it exist in like a solar punk future? How does it exist, in this continuation of these exponential jumps that we're having and like culture and politics even and, innovation, technology and but still retain the like re-indigenization and that connection to all the things that make us who we are. So Proximita is that. It's like Mama reloaded into where we are currently, which is always everywhere kind of at the same time, but at least how we're
Yeah.
experiencing now. So
That's cool. Yeah. I also saw that you describe it as not just a band, but as a social change platform, right? Is that where all the other things that you're doing now come in? Like, how tightly are they connected? Or do you see like the food forest, for example, as an extension or as a part of Proxevita, or is that different projects? And if so, what do you mean with like the platform around it, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely connected because
Uh,
Proxavita is kind of like its own lore for who like I am, So I'm just kind of like, how do I exist in this society too? So Proxavita is almost like a superhero alias that does all these things. And
that's
so
cool.
the food forest is like the place that shows that it's possible because I think a lot of people get and it's important that we obviously look at things seriously and understand the gravity of things, but we also have so many things that are like taking from our energy because a lot of the sustainability crisis and climate crisis is like a lack of efficiencies and energy and how we do things. And like honestly make things way harder than they need to be. Like it doesn't need to be as difficult. And again, that's a lot of that business as usual the energy that I was
Mm,
talking about earlier that, kind of sent me spiraling into these existential crises in
yeah.
school. So, it's just kind of like, yeah, basically, I'm trying to get back to that question because it got like real.
Yeah, about how much you felt it was like connected with the food forest, or that
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
the social.
Okay.
What do you see as the social change platform around Proxivita? Yeah. Hmm.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for bringing me back there because I was like,
No worries.
it's all connected. It's just
That
who I
happens to me.
yeah. Um,
Almost human, right?
yeah, it is. It is like a harmonization point though, for sure, of like the culture, the action, the regeneration, the permaculture, the connectivity, unity, and kind of radical optimism and all of these things. So the food forest is like, um, oh my God. Okay, so this is actually really funny. I haven't told people this like in an
Tell me.
interview.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Okay. So we have this, like, I don't know, out of Stanford, they have, the design school and they have this whole human-centered design modality and these sorts of things that I was getting to study in my sustainability program. And I'm a little more beyond human-centered because obviously everything matters, all life matters, and being too anthropocentric isn't always the best thing. Uh, but in that class, they asked us, like, draw out your dream career. And I swear I wanted to draw myself as a superhero, as Proximita for the first thing. And I was like,
That's
okay,
so cool.
I was like the only artist in this program and, surrounded by biologists and engineers, right, and stuff. And it was in like the law school, the university. And I was like, I'm just going to save myself this like cringy moment and just put my second choice, which is um a tree. And I drew like a disco ball to like indicate like,
That's
vibe.
so cool. Yeah.
And then I drew a guy with a suit on, and then I drew like, I don't know, like a college student or somebody hanging out, in the same space, like
Mm-hmm.
be together and just showing a way to kind of work cross sector, cross generation, cross all of these spaces. And
Cool.
yeah, just realizing those spaces didn't exist, at least in North Carolina. I think now more and more people are understanding the value of these spaces. But at the time, I saw a lot of people being displaced ecologically, myself included, the joy that I got as a child running through and not really having that anymore. And then also where I live in North Carolina has been nationally ranked for food deserts. So also for child food insecurity. So that just broke my heart, because I don't know how people are going to be able to experience and enjoy art if they are trying to figure out how to get, their lights on and food and the basic needs met. So it just made my heart grow, for how can we make this. a point of healing, and connectivity, and not just like a point of defeat.
Hmm. Yeah, I completely get what you say about like, you know, you need certain basic needs first and then you can enjoy, you know, it's like this pyramid
So
of, I think they teach it in psychology as like Maslow or so, like that you first need food and security and then friendships and relationships and then, you know,
exactly.
you can really develop.
Mhm.
Yeah. That's beautiful.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That's really beautiful that you found a way to yeah, connect those basically.
Mm.
I have one question that I wanted to ask you about that. And that is, what do you think like permaculture can teach artists, and what artistic thinking do you think brings good to permaculture or nature or caring for that in general?
Oh gosh. Mhm. Well, just to kind of circle back on what we were talking about as far as the
Mm,
importance of making sure you're good, um, there are different, like, they're not even levels, but they're like scopes of um systems, like kind of like a
mm,
systems thing. And so the first scope, like, or zero, is actually you. So when you start with permaculture, you're looking at your inner landscape and like seeing your immediate environment, because this is again extension. So, before you go to a garden or that sort of thing, you're also looking at like the parts of your life. So I think as an artist, I think that's really valuable, really as a human, because we're not always encouraged to think in these ways. And so to finally have the invitation to think about ecology, wellness, and bringing in all the parts that make, you come alive, so that happens in other spaces too. And um, yeah, and then far out, permaculture is also the community, so an audience, and building a sustainable, community. I think that, at least for me, I live to have my music do things that are positive in the world and give people some hope and inspiration and, the joy, right? And also connecting that to those solutions. But all that to say, permaculture is for everybody, you know, not just artists. I think anyone that isn't involved should explore it further, because it's, everything from, you know, building soil and these sorts of things to even going out and forest bathing and just, being part of the environment. So I love that it invites, again, all the parts of who you are into these spaces, because I think um, maybe more modern approaches to landscaping or agriculture um, can feel a little dehumanizing, to be honest, because, it's like, oh, throw this nitrogen here, this phosphorus here, or what have you, and leave it alone. There isn't really a relationship there. In permaculture, you have a constant connection and a relationship. It's not just like, oh, we go volunteer at the community garden, blah, 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 and like it has more integrativity to it. And it also has, um, I think, parts that are unpredictable, which as a creative, I think is important. Like, how do you, um, face adversity? How do we face changes? Like, I think these are very um, substantive materials that artists work with, day to day, and so I think permaculture offers a place to find that. Mhm.
yeah, the unexpected and the not like get it when you ask for it, which is like a lot present, I feel now in the world in general. Like
Yeah.
we get a lot of like, we click here, we get this, or we, you know, you
Mhm.
don't even have to call anywhere anymore because you can literally tap for it. So I can imagine
Right.
there's a lot of value as well in like the community aspect, but also encountering things that you don't expect and, you know, using your human skill set to like deal with that, or react to that in a way that because you didn't expect it. Yeah. Why do you think everyone should like do something in it? And how do you start with something like that? If if it sounds beautiful, but
Oh,
someone like is interested but has no idea how to start with, you know, how do you say it?
permaculture.
Giving a part or joining in it.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's similar to the arts, right? It kind of like starts with playing around and, but obviously there are tools, and like ways to learn about it. But
Mm,
just to kind of circle back on the unexpected bits, because there is something I thought about in the food forest that I think would make a lot of sense here. We have basically an extension of what's called like a Hugel culture. So you're using limbs and kind of materials that could be mulch, but you're building up berms, and it's a really great method for soil water retention. So, this is like super helpful, like interseasonally, and also to diversify like the plants you might have, and also restoring water tables if there's been too much like, um, industrialized agricultural approaches or urbanization, any of these kind of things that deplete the like native landscape. So that's like a place to start is natives. But with the hugel culture, we turned it into like an earth couch. So instead of just the berm, we created it where you could like sit on it and be part of the food forest. So, getting creative like that. And there were a couple like native plants and seeds that I had scattered as far as like pollinators go. And it was so cool to see um how you don't design all yourself. Like the nature designs with you. And
mm,
so, birds will eat the berries and then they're planting them when they fly over.
yeah. With a
So,
bit of compost already attached. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. So, like,
So
almost
fun.
every year now, like, there's different, well, yeah, every year actually, there's everything from sunflowers to black-eyed Susans, marigolds, all these things that just
Mm,
kind of like come back. And you're like, they're annuals. They're things that shouldn't be like planted that come back perennial, like year after year, but they'll find their way and you're just like, "Oh my gosh." And then this is a full ecosystem too because they're not just gonna be doing that at the food forest, right? They're gonna be doing that around that neighborhood and the whole community. So the moment you take steps to and like you said, how do you get started? Like seed bombing is really great, just setting up a little pollinator bed because that's gonna build interconnectivity to your whole ecosystem. And remembering, because when you're an artist too, I think, or when you're a human, right? We do things in the world and we don't see the ripple effects of what we do. And that becomes really discouraging because it's like you were saying, you don't see the results or, you don't see it in the real time and you can feel disconnected that much more. So, when people are taking the steps to, repopulate the native plants and the pollinators, it's such a beautiful way to just be like, you experience it and it's all there and it's happening and it's just like it's so beautiful. And so I think planting that and and also being able to kind of like let it go and let it thrive, you know, and be okay with however it's going to look because you can have an expectation, but nature's still going to kind of do what nature does. And so you can, I mean, true permaculture is co-designing with the nature. Like before we did the burn, we were looking at the slopes in the landscape and kind of where the rainwater, like the hydrology flow in the map, like where is the water going? Like how does it like to move? How can we mark, on contour all these places and carve out more water retention? Because North Carolina gets kind of warm in the summertime. So, being able to hold on to the water is really important. And so,
mm,
yeah, all of that stuff matters. So just, yeah, but it's cool synthesis of like the creativity and the science of it too. But also leaving room again. or the land wisdoms of.
I love that you still call that example out, because I can really see also, how you as an artist can learn from the things you encountered there with the unexpected things. And for example, the thing that you mentioned about an artist not always getting validation for the work in the short term and feeling a bit like
Yeah.
demotivated maybe, if you then can, if you know the existence of the link with the seed bombing, for example, that the birds sometimes a year later it pops up somewhere else,
It's
and
true.
nature is going to design its own way for your artistic journey. If you
Mhm.
know the existence of those permaculture connections, your brain might lay those connections for your art as well. And I think that's really, beautiful example indeed, as you said. Yeah.
Mhm.
Happy that you still called that out. Yeah. Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. I'm also excited to actually play some of the music. So that people that are listening and now are wondering, like, yeah, fun, all the yapping, but what about the music then?
Mhm.
How does it sound? So I want to listen together with you to Shine Like a Star.
Okay.
I think,
Mhm.
yeah, I listened to it. I really liked it. It's a bit mysterious with the intro. Also has this radiation and like the dreaminess through it a bit. Really feels like Shine Like a Star in that
Mhm.
sense. I would say let's listen to it together and then we can chat a bit about it after. Yes, shine like a star. What a beautiful and like spoken out title you got there.
Thank you.
What I find really interesting with this one personally is that it has, but I feel that with your other tracks as well, actually, that they have a lot of layers, and I feel like the layers are very blended through each other, and it's like also the vocals are almost in a more like storytelling kind of way, and not really like super tight or fit to the tempo or like to the rhythm or stuff. Is it
Mm,
like a very conscious and on purpose choice, or do you just find it sound very cool?
yeah, I mean, I think, with Shine Like a Star especially is kind of I mean, a star is in another place in another time from the moment we experience it. And, they say, like, when you see a star, like, it's right? It's traveled so long before you even see it emanating. So I think the expanse of the vocal lines and kind of this, like, moving across, like, the meter of the perceivable time is
Mm.
really what that line does, from the storytelling perspective, and also how you can, um, feel that, across those time spaces. So it's kind of like the star itself, how it emanates, and similar to the ripples we talked about earlier,
That's so cool, yeah.
where this
A
sort
bit
of
like how long it takes for the light of the star to reach the earth. You mean like that there's the
yes.
delay and the blend, and that's so cool, yeah.
Mhm.
Very original thought to like incorporate that. Uh,
Thank you.
was that then also the seed for the song, or was there more like an emotional or other story that you wanted to like tell with the song?
Yeah, I mean, it's it's funny because it's like a lot of this conversation we've been having, um,
Mm.
you know, that, gosh, because there's so many parts of it, I'm, like, almost in my lyrics because it's, like, a different part of my brain when I'm singing versus, like, the poetry storytelling, like, I know it's there, but it's also, like, I have to, like, almost sing through the song in my head to remember the word. Like, it's, like, attached
You
that
can go ahead. We don't mind.
yeah. You're so sweet. What was after that? I'm so sorry, now I'm just, like, going on my own little brain. Um, I'm trying to remember what comes after that, I'm like, "Oh my god, how does it go?"
I find it beautiful. I think you use the silence when I'm not talking pretty well.
I'm comfortable with the silence, I'll just, like, make my own, vibe.
I'm curious how that maybe is for Shine Like a Star then. I read that you see your art and your music as an offering to Earth as well.
Mhm.
Um, I'm curious, like, what that means for you if you make your music an offering to Earth, and maybe then you remember how that felt when you offered Shine Like a Star to Earth, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so similar to how, Proxevita evolved from mama and kind of being the expression of ecology, because we are nature too, it's not
Mm,
like, we are all voices of the earth when we are in that space of that understanding and embodiment. So, it's just like the sense of awareness and tapping in and, becoming like a channel for that as well. Yeah. Yeah. Getting out of the way, getting the ego like out of the way, so that can come through. Hmm.
mm. That's cool. Do you remember when you started approaching your music in a way of like offering then rather than in another way?
Yeah. I mean, probably, yeah, with mama, like I did that. And, I just would take a minute, like as you were playing it, I felt the wind move in. I'm here by the window and I could feel, just a sense of animation even in the environment. And that's exactly the kind of energy that okay. So the other day I was playing one of my newer singles, for my mom, before putting it out
Mm,
because it's holidays, we're like with family. Um, you're stateside, so
Mm.
and I swear one of the trees we had in the dining room where I was playing the song started dancing. No wind, no draft or anything on that plant to make it move.
Yeah,
And it started dancing. It was like wiggling its leaves. And I was like, I'm
that's so good.
gushing. I was like such a fangirl. Like I was just like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
this is what I want to do with the music, you know?
If
And
you're vibing to it, this one's for you.
I
Yeah,
couldn't believe it.
that's
That
so
to me
good.
was like, I made it.
Yeah,
You know, the plants are
yeah,
dancing with me. Like, I love
that's
it.
so good. Yeah, that's a milestone reached.
Mhm.
For sure.
Yeah.
Did you
Yes.
have that with your other music as well before? Or was it like a first that it felt like such a special moment and
Yeah, I think it's something we've always have had since we're younger, but we just kind of have to tap back into it, right? So,
mm, yeah, like the also in line with the play, right? Like the yeah, taking things light, you mean then? And like
mhm.
taking things joyful and running around like you mentioned earlier as a kid that you're just flying and like
Yes.
enjoying, the oddities and the weird stuff as well. Yeah. Or
Hmm.
what's framed as weird or whatever. No.
Yeah, and listening instead of just being like, ah! Like taking a moment and being calm and like receiving it more. Like sometimes that is the offering. Like trying to try as much as just being and, you know, yeah, being in resonance and being connected there.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. That's
Yeah.
yeah, beautiful. I guess that took some time and some crashes to figure out as well. Or not.
Little
Or
bit.
is that just me?
Whatever, and then you're like, "Oh, just get out of the way." It's simple, not simple. It's just like because that's what sure is so important because it's like that space between like making it okay. This is why I think artists have such a responsibility, um, which gets challenging because it's like, oh my gosh, the world needs art. Like we need these cultural shifts. We need it to be okay to be. Like we need to make it okay to just exist and have that be like peaceful and joyful and the things that life is meant to be because we have so much more to us. I've been really lucky like working with one of my dear friends in the studio and working on some visual assets to go along with what I'm creating sonically and he shows me pictures that he's done of nature touring around in his time. And when you see just like the breadth and the depth of the landscapes and how beautiful they are, like he was showing me Colorado, and I was like, oh my gosh, the rock formations and the sediments, and just it reminds you like it's okay to dream big. Like it's okay for us to want more and to be more and to have that and to, you know, care for ourselves and each other. I think we're finally getting into that place, thank God. Like more status quo culture, more, young people were like, this isn't sustainable. We can't just be like, terrible to each other. Like, what are we even doing? That's not even fun. No one's even enjoying this, So making it okay to be compassionate, making it, cool to be kind, like
Yeah. I find that
and
pretty cool.
healthy.
Yeah. Yeah. And healthy. Yeah.
Yes.
True.
Like, I love
Yeah.
what
Is
Glasgow
it
and Scotland are doing right now. Like, the happiness index is, like, a part of how is everybody doing? Like, what are we you know, that's wealth, you know?
yeah. I think that's a very interesting topic, like what we defined as wealth as well. And I
Mhm.
feel that there
Yeah.
is luckily more people like questioning that and um, shaping their own or new directions a bit in that.
Mhm.
Also in line with what you said earlier, like I'm curious still. I want to get back to that. Like you said, we make it way too complicated. It can be way easier. How does that tie into that for you? Because it is so simple, but it's not. You also said just now, like how is that? Um, yeah, how does that show for you?
I mean, a lot of it is, like bad habits, I guess, people learn, right? But anything that takes your energy that's gonna be not an efficiency, and they say that there's, things like grounding, going outside, that gives you energy, doing something creative that you love, watercoloring, taking a walk out in nature, you know, just
Mm.
getting sleep, like going to bed, like actually going to bed,
Yeah.
which can be a challenge. Who would have thought,
Mm.
I guess we should have known because it's even hard to get children to go to sleep, It's like people just wanna, like, be where everything's happening, but sometimes you gotta chill out to be there too, I guess,
Yeah.
and, it's, having a safe environment, having a place where you feel, safe to express yourself,
Mm.
that's so much the core of it, you know? You can't have the creativity and, um, all of these things if you don't have, again, those basic needs met. So, you know. Did I answer the question?
Yeah. I
Okay.
think you did. I think you did. I think it's I think I agree very much on the fact that there are so many, like, it's in theory it's also simple, but to do it right is hard, or sometimes even to do
Mhm.
the right thing is hard, even though you know what would
Yeah.
be the right thing, like going to bed, putting your phone away, because you're really not needing it. Like, you can feel the signals of your body, or like your mind racing, or like your body being restless or whatever. And there are these like little moments that your brain says, maybe you
Yeah,
should do this, and you don't listen to it, or you feel like you can't, or automatic pilot takes over and you're, just doing that, or
1,000%. Yeah,
takes
1,000%.
effort sometimes. Yeah.
And I think also
Uh,
thinking about, like, the energetic return on investment instead of just, like, an ROI,
mm,
because not all money is equal, What is the real cost
mm,
of that? I think, a lot of people are at least conditioned to think finance and these things are just, like, fiscal, and it's like, there's so much more than that. We have creative capital, intellectual capital, spiritual capital, cultural capital, natural resource capital, just all of these beautiful forms of energy and like things that make us who we are. So, you know, if, yeah, what's going to give you energy, what's going to like make you feel good and just
yeah.
being able to bring that back into the decisions, and then making
Yeah.
the culture okay to do that, There's so many things, but then again, that's gonna be a whole paradigm shift if we move to that, like,
Yeah.
so much of how the world is right now can't exist like that, so it's like, we're at
Yeah.
such a critical time in history, it's like it's almost like moving through
Yeah.
the eye of the needle, It's like, you just gotta,
Yeah.
like, get get
Yeah.
through
You gotta
there and
bend
then
a little
into the
bit
next
like this.
paradigm, like, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
I agree. I think, like, well, like what you said earlier as well, like, we are just part of like one big nature. Like, we're just a
Mhm.
tiny bit of it. Technically, I think humans make up 0.01% of all living things on this planet. But
Mhm.
yet our impact is like very big, I think. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of systems that we invented that apparently not a lot of people are thriving really well on. So
Mhm.
yeah, I don't want to undertake everything away, because I think there's a lot of developments that, brought a lot of, it added a lot of, for example, years of life, or living in better health, or,
Mhm.
there is a lot of research that gave us a lot, and technology as well, I think, can do
Yeah.
amazing things. But I think we have to ask ourselves a bit more, like, not can we do it, but do we want to do it? Like, with some things, like, do we need that to be happy, or not really, I think. And yeah, I think
Yes.
that's key points. And as you say it now as well, I have more and more people that I talk with that are saying the same or similar things, or, parts of it, or at least people are speaking out their feelings about those topics. And yeah, you see that those things are then like shifting a bit, or that more people are, you know, feeling the same. I'm curious. Like, I feel you do so many things. like, and you're also so consciously trying to build all these sustainability pillars around your art, or like basically everything you do, because I saw the food forest, of course, but I also saw you organize like a sustainable fashion event there. You're running
Mhm.
this shop to, actively campaign against the hunger in the food deserts, as you mentioned. You played at the United Nations Conference of Parties as well. And you presented there, I think, on the food forest a bit as well. So I feel
Yeah.
like you're doing so many things. And I can imagine there are maybe some artists or people in general listening that think I also want to, put my energy and my efforts into things that do well, but I don't know how to start. Maybe start with, for artists listening that think like, I want to connect my art to, a cause or activism,
Yeah.
but have no idea where to start. Where would you start? What would be your steps looking back on it now?
What brings you to life, right? The things that you really enjoy. Like, and I don't know that I've ever talked to a single artist that didn't have, an awareness of at least two or three causes that they really care for, you know, or have encountered firsthand, like to want to be an advocate for through their own experience. So,
Mm,
starting with what's authentic to you is going to be the most important because that's going to be that um, authenticity that's going to really invigorate it and, where you can pour yourself into that and it also pours back into you, and it feels good, So
mhm,
finding the balance too, like, um, and you'll know if it's too much because it'll hurt. You'll be like, oh, wait, I'm supposed to enjoy doing this, but it's like, so being able to listen to those
mm,
parts too, because there's so many people in the world. And so, finding the right community and the people that you work well with and, you can connect with. It's kind of like forming a band, which is not easy to do, let me tell you. It's like everyone
yeah.
wants to be
And the
seen.
more members, the more problems, right?
Everyone, but then
Yeah.
not everyone wants to show up and do the work and, people want the fruits, but they're not necessarily like willing to tend the soil with you. And there's all that. So I mean, I think as you move into more of like self-knowledge, these things happen naturally because then you start to kind of magnetize it in. Like it's not necessarily a formula of like, how do I go and find these people? Because that's also can start to feel kind of transactional when you're like seeking people
Mm,
out for a certain end. So I would recommend seeking your authenticity and your gifts and your purpose and these things and then like, you know, say you want to help um literacy, maybe volunteering with like Big Brother, Big Sister, doing things in these spaces, going to read stories, that sort of thing. Like finding ways, or even with elders, or people that are English as a second language, there's so many ways to kind of find these. But then we have these challenges too because of time, and that sort
mm.
of thing. So sometimes I think it depends on your skill sets because, maybe you're really good at putting budgets together, and nonprofits have needs for that to get grants and that sort of thing. Or maybe, yeah, it just kind of depends on you and your brain, your neurospicy, whatever that might be. And then how does that kind of, instead of trying to conform yourself to a mold, like, find what that is for you, and then all of that will kind of come as a result.
It's
So
a bit like the ikigai, right? Like what
yeah.
are you good at? What do you like to do? And what do you care about, I think? Or isn't it those three, I think?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, what the world needs, what you're good at, and what makes you
Yeah.
like, what helps pours back into you.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think it's funny because now that I think about it, it's like at least 70, maybe even 80%. of the things I've done haven't been because I'm, like, seeking out opportunities, you know? Yes, you put
No.
in, like, the effort, you still do the thing, and you have all your effort ahead of time to be your artist's craft or whatever, but those opportunities will kind of
Yeah.
again, they kinda, like, magnetize and will come your way, like, people will see you, people will, um, align with you, you know? And you can have your path and you still align. But, yeah. And it's hard to give that advice again to, like, a general scope of artists because I feel like it's such a unique answer, like, it can't be answered as, like, "This is what you do, this is the formula." It's more like it's always gonna depend on that person, on the artist, and, where are they located, what's going on there in their immediate communities, and
Yeah. Yeah. So like practically I hear you say identify your skill set and what you like to do and what you can bring and identify what is needed in your area, maybe that you can hands-on work on. I think that's quite some homework for someone that doesn't know where to start already. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, because if you have ambitions to be, global with it, you have to be in the local space because that is global. Like, when you go to, the COP, I was actually just at the last one in Brazil, crazy, crazy. Like, I've been to 3 COPs, that was by far the most, um, challenging of all of them. I'll have to say that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And,
What made it challenging?
oh gosh, everything, like, all the countries that didn't even come just because of the logistics, the challenges financially
Mm,
for so many, NGOs and people who are really doing the work. And,
yeah.
it was just, like, very fragmented, just very and then there were, fires in the venue, like, they literally had to evacuate, like, crazy, you know? Um, References made to indigenous, that weren't upheld, just there are a couple things. Um, but when you're in those spaces, like, everyone's working locally in some way. I mean, yes, they'll do regional and then they have global impacts and stuff, but, you know, so much, at least with the sustainability conversation, is
Mm,
starting to realize, like, oh, we need to be doing capacity building. Like, every community should be able to take care of itself. That's self-reliance in a nutshell. So it's interesting to see that kind of shift back from how can someone have the most global impact to also like, oh, the local impact actually is that global impact too. Um,
yeah. It accumulates into global if everyone does their local, you mean?
yes, but you need both because it can burn you out. Like, you need to connect with the people who are doing this on their local level too globally, because then that's the community and you're not
Mm,
alone. There's other people also doing actions, you know?
yeah. 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 Interesting. Yeah. I think um I think to start small is a good idea as well for like especially if you're, you want to start out, I think. Um
Mhm.
I think this
And
topic can
small can
feel
be
like a
big.
very big
Mhm.
load, trying to carry the weight into hands of the world that's not working.
Yeah.
Uh, what is like next for Proxevita? How do you see Proxevita develop in the next, I don't know, it's hard to say such a big time because I think a lot of things develop organically. But if you can imagine your dream Proxevita in 5 years from now, how would it look for you?
5 years, 5 albums later at least, if not 7. No, I mean, I've been working on that sort of thing. So, I
Mm.
actually recently wrote, first of its kind climate opera. So that debuted at the last climate conference in Brazil, in Belém, Brazil. And so, been really kind of working on that here in the past year. So, I think probably had like 2, 3 single releases from Proxevita there. But that's because I've been working on this opera. It's not because I haven't been trying to, do music. I've been doing music. It's just been in another field, which has been really kind of cool to see how to bring again the classical, right? It's a very different world than contemporary, but I'm in a place where I'm more embracing again all the parts of who I am and like crossover, that sort of thing. So that said, I'm also, kind of storyboarding and gearing up some releases for, couple albums sort of thing, you know?
All right.
Mhm. Yeah, I don't want to give like too much away, but that's also like how does Proxevita kind of evolve through this and maybe blend in some of the um sound healing, like these etheric, and then which the classical can really kind of bring too. And yeah, so like etheric, electronic, almost avant-garde,
Mm,
so yeah, I
cool.
don't want to give too
Very
much
curious
away.
for how that's gonna evolve. Yeah.
Mhm.
Let's then just agree that when it's almost there, you just send me a message and we can have another chat on when you want to share more about it.
Absolutely.
Cool. Cool. I slowly want to go towards the end. After we said goodbye, I still want to play Solazzo, your song that you also sent in.
Okay.
So I'm gonna play it at the end of the episode after we said goodbye. It's also a very hypnotic and dreamy, and also there is some of the electronic influences in there as well. I feel like the glitchiness and stuff, which I really
I
like.
love this.
But
This one's actually about hummingbirds.
about the birds. Oh,
Yeah,
really?
like the
Is
hummingbird.
Solazzo, is that the name for the bird, or?
Yeah, actually, it's a bird name for sure, but it's also, so I have a friend, from Peru, and he says, like, in Lima, the capital, it's like they have, every area of regionality, like where a language is spoken, there's always like different inflections and characters and that sort of thing. So in Lima, they're almost like Italians, but they won't just say like sol, they'll say solazo, like these sorts of things.
Ah,
So I
they
just,
make it more like.
yeah. And then this song being about hummingbirds as pollinators
Mm.
and how when you see a hummingbird, it's like a sun, just like so much joy. And they like their hearts are just so pure, right? They're just like floating in the air. So, ruby colored messengers with the power to fly. So that's like the
Wow,
line in Solasso. And they just like they fly again. You hear like the gate kind of sounds like they fly through all of these.
that's the wing, like that's representing the flight or the wing movement, or
Yeah,
for
like
you.
at these
Yeah,
top speeds, like cutting across space time itself. Just kind of like
that's so
moving
cool.
around. So they're also interdimensional messengers in indigenous Mexica mythology as well, and guardians of women and the divine feminine. So it's there's some of that in there too. So love that song.
That sounds very cool. I'm gonna listen to the song now in a different way, I think, because I
Yay.
listened before our talk, but now I know what the meaning is, and now I can
Mhm.
listen to it again and like have that in mind. That's very nice. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. What do you want people then to feel after they hear the song?
The joy, just like lighter, just like the sun shone on them, and they're just lighter. I think happier and just like beaming, glowing. Just being able to feel like you know, lifted.
That sounds beautiful. Yeah. I'm not gonna add anything on that because I think that's a very beautiful note to end on. Joy. That sounds just great.
You.
Yeah.
Thank you so
Before we
much,
dive into
Jeff.
the song, yeah, no worries. Thank you as well. How many do you know? I know this one. This one. What else do you have? This one? Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah, they're more than and then there's yes.
That also works.
Mhm.
Before I put the song on and I wave goodbye to you, I do have to say though, anyone listening, if they want to find out more about your work or your music or anything, I dropped all the links in the description to the Food Forest, to the Proxevita albums, all the other projects. So if you're into that, go check that out. And if you made it this far, apparently you find it interesting to listen to these podcasts. So please subscribe or give a follow, because we do restore 1 square meter of ecosystem for every follower on every channel. So it's 1 or 2 clicks for you. It's free and it really helps heal the earth. So that will be great. Yeah, Laura, thank you so much again for your time, for showing up and for sharing so openly. It was really nice to have you. Maybe we'll talk for a future album or opera.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
So